The dragon's breathing had become worse over the past 3 days. Each exhale rattled like stones tumbling through a metal pipe, and small wisps of smoke escaped from the corners of her mouth, even when she wasn't trying to produce fire. Elena pressed her hand against the scaled chest of her mother and felt the uneven rhythm beneath the emerald plates that had once gleamed like polished gems, but now looked dull and cracked. "Mother, we need to find help," Elena said softly, running her fingers along the ridge of scales that ran down the dragon's neck. "The healers in the village don't know what to do. They've never treated a dragon before." The great beast's golden eyes opened slowly, focusing on the young woman who sat beside her in the cave they'd called home for the past 15 years. When Elena had been just a child of 7, wandering lost in the mountains after her human village had been destroyed by raiders, this dragon had found her. The creature had taken her in, raised her, taught her the ways of the wild and the secrets of the ancient world. Now the roles had reversed, and Elena felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "The old ways are dying, little one," the dragon wheezed, her voice like grinding stones. "Perhaps it is simply my time." "No," Elena said firmly. "I won't accept that. There has to be someone who can help." She had heard stories from travelers who sometimes passed near their mountain home. Stories of the humans in the cities below, of their strange machines and mechanical wonders. They had devices that could do impossible things, tools that worked with precision beyond what magic could achieve. The humans had moved beyond the old ways, creating a new world built on metal and engineering rather than spells and ancient power. One story in particular had stuck in Elena's mind. A trader had spoken of mechanics in the human city of Ironhaven, people who could fix anything mechanical. He laughed as he told the tale of a mechanic who had repaired a noble's clockwork horse, making it run smoother than it had when it was new. At the time, Elena had dismissed it as an interesting curiosity. Now, desperate for any solution, she wondered if these mechanics might see problems differently than traditional healers. "I'm going to take you to Ironhaven," Elena announced, "to see a mechanic." The dragon's eyes widened slightly. "A mechanic? Child, I am not a machine." "But you're not responding to magic either," Elena countered. "The healers tried every spell they knew. Maybe someone who looks at problems in a different way will see something they missed." It took 2 days to convince the dragon to attempt the journey, and another day to prepare. Elena fashioned a crude harness from vines and leather, creating something her mother could wear that would help support her weight if the weakness became too much during flight. The dragon protested at first, pride warring with necessity, but eventually agreed. They set out at dawn on the 4th day. The flight that should have taken a few hours stretched into most of the day as the dragon had to stop frequently to rest. Each landing was rougher than the last, and Elena's worry grew with every labored breath her mother took. By the time the spires and smokestacks of Ironhaven came into view on the horizon, the sun was beginning to set, painting the industrial city in shades of orange and red. The dragon managed to land in a clearing on the outskirts of the city, near where the buildings gave way to fields and farmland. She collapsed onto her side immediately, chest heaving with the effort of breathing. Elena slid down from her mother's back and steadied herself, looking toward the city walls. "I'll find help," she promised. "Just rest here. I'll be back soon." Elena ran toward the city gates, her heart pounding. The guards spotted her approach and raised their spears, but she called out before they could bar her entry. "Please, I need help. My mother is sick, and I was told there are mechanics here who can fix anything." The guards exchanged confused glances. One of them, a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, lowered her spear slightly. "Mechanics fix machines, girl. If someone's sick, you need a doctor." "The doctors couldn't help," Elena said breathlessly. "Please, I've traveled so far. I just need to find someone willing to try something different." The guard studied her for a long moment, taking in Elena's worn clothing, her sun-darkened skin, and the desperate look in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. There's a mechanic's shop on Ford Street, 3 blocks in and then left at the fountain. Ask for Jake. He's got a reputation for taking on strange jobs. Can't promise he'll help, but he might at least listen." Elena thanked her and hurried through the gates into the city. Iron Haven was overwhelming to someone who'd spent most of her life in a mountain cave. The streets were paved with smooth stones, and buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high on either side. Mechanical lamps were beginning to light up as dusk deepened, their glow steady and bright, unlike the flickering of torches. The air smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, and the sound of hammering and grinding echoed from dozens of workshops. She found Ford Street and the fountain, then followed the guard's directions to a building with a sign that read, "Jake's Mechanical Repairs and Fabrication." Through the large windows, she could see a workshop filled with tools, half-assembled machines, and parts she couldn't begin to identify. A figure moved in the back, bent over a workbench. Elena pushed open the door, causing a bell to chime. The figure at the workbench straightened and turned. He was a man in his early 30s, with short brown hair, oil-stained hands, and sharp green eyes that studied her with curiosity. He wore a leather apron covered in scorch marks and grease stains. "We're about to close," he said, not unkindly. "But if it's urgent, I can spare a few minutes. What needs fixing?" "My mother," Elena blurted out. "She's sick, and no one else can help her." Jake set down the tool he'd been holding and wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm a mechanic, not a doctor. You need the medical hall, 2 streets over." "She's a dragon," Elena said quickly. "And the healers already tried. They couldn't help. I was told mechanics in this city can fix anything, that you see problems differently than others. Please, I know it sounds strange, but I don't know where else to turn." Jake stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, one corner of his mouth quirked up in a half-smile. "A dragon," he repeated. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. She's in the field outside the city walls, near the western gate. She couldn't fly any further." Jake was quiet for several seconds, thinking. Then he walked to a cabinet and began pulling out tools, selecting them carefully and placing them in a leather bag. "I'll come take a look," he said finally. "But I'm not making any promises. I've never worked on a living creature before, let alone a dragon. This is probably a waste of both our time." "Thank you," Elena breathed, relief flooding through her. "Thank you so much." They left the shop together, Jake locking the door behind them. As they walked through the streets toward the western gate, he asked questions about the dragon's symptoms. Elena described everything in detail: the rattling breath, the irregular heartbeat, the loss of fire control, the dimming scales, the weakness that had come on gradually over the past few weeks. Jake listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification. Elena noticed that he didn't ask the questions a healer would ask about magical energy or spiritual balance. Instead, he asked about the mechanics of how her mother's body worked, about the physical processes of breathing fire and flying. "Dragons aren't actually magical," Jake said as they approached the gate. "Not in the way people think. Oh, they can do things that seem like magic, but it's all based on biological processes, specialized organs, unique chemical reactions, evolutionary adaptations that look impossible until you understand the mechanics of how they work." Elena blinked in surprise. "I've never heard anyone describe it that way before." "Most people don't think about it," Jake replied. "They see something amazing and call it magic, without trying to understand the actual mechanisms. But everything follows rules, even dragonfire. There's always a system, always a logical process. You just have to figure out what it is." They reached the gate, and the same guard from before looked surprised to see Elena returning with company. Jake nodded to her in greeting, clearly familiar, and she waved them through without question. The dragon was where Elena had left her, lying on her side in the tall grass. Her breathing had become even more labored, and small sparks occasionally sputtered from her nostrils instead of the steady flame she should have been able to produce. Her golden eyes opened as Elena and Jake approached, and she tried to lift her head in alarm at the stranger. "It's all right, Mother," Elena soothed, hurrying to the dragon's side. "This is Jake. He's going to try to help." Jake had stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of the creature before him. Even diminished by illness, the dragon was impressive. 40 feet long from nose to tail, with wings that spanned 60 feet when fully extended. Her scales caught the last light of the dying day, emerald green fading to lighter jade along her belly. "Incredible," Jake whispered. He shook himself and stepped closer, moving slowly to avoid startling the dragon. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to examine you if that's all right. I need to understand what's happening inside your body." The dragon regarded him with ancient eyes, then glanced at Elena. The young woman nodded encouragingly. "Very well, human mechanic," the dragon rumbled. "Do what you must, but know that I have little faith in metal workers understanding flesh and scale." "Fair enough," Jake said. He set down his tool bag and pulled out several items. Elena recognized a stethoscope, something she'd seen traveling doctors use, but the other devices were unfamiliar. One had a small bellows attached to a series of glass tubes. Another looked like a metal horn connected to a box covered in dials. Jake began his examination methodically, starting by listening to the dragon's breathing through the stethoscope at various points along her chest and sides. He frowned in concentration, moving the instrument carefully and asking the dragon to breathe deeply when she could. Then he used the device with the bellows, having the dragon breathe into it while he watched the colored liquids in the glass tubes rise and fall. "Your oxygen levels are low," he muttered, making notes on a pad of paper. "Really low. And there's something off about the carbon dioxide ratio, too." He moved to examine the dragon's mouth, politely asking her to open wide so he could look down her throat. Elena held up a lantern to provide light while Jake peered inside, occasionally making small noises of interest or concern. "There's your problem," he said, finally straightening up. "Or at least part of it." "What is it?" Elena asked anxiously. "Your mother has something blocking her auxiliary breathing passages," Jake explained. "Dragons have a secondary respiratory system separate from their primary lungs. It's what allows them to produce and control fire. The passages run alongside the main throat and connect to specialized organs that produce the combustible chemicals. But look here." He gestured for Elena to look, pointing carefully into the dragon's open mouth. Deep in the throat, she could see what he meant. There were dark, crystalline formations growing along the walls of the passages Jake had described, narrowing them significantly. "Those formations are blocking the airflow," Jake continued. "It means your fire organs aren't getting enough oxygen, which is why you can't control your flames properly. But it's also affecting your overall breathing efficiency. The blockage is creating pressure that's backing up into your main respiratory system, and that's causing the irregular heartbeat and the weakness." The dragon closed her mouth slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I have never heard of such a thing. What causes these formations?" Jake pulled out a small sample kit and carefully collected a tiny scraping of the crystalline material from just inside the dragon's mouth where he could reach it safely. He held it up to the lamplight, examining it closely. "I'd need to analyze this properly in my workshop, but if I had to guess, it's mineral buildup. You breathe fire, which means you're constantly exposing these passages to extremely high temperatures. Over time, minerals from your diet and the water you drink are getting superheated and depositing on the passage walls, like scale building up in a boiler or pipes." "Can you fix it?" Elena asked, hope rising in her chest. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. "Maybe," he said finally. "It's going to require some creative thinking and tools that don't exist yet, but the principle is sound. I need to find a way to break down or remove those mineral deposits without damaging the surrounding tissue." He looked at the dragon directly. "Ma'am, this is going to take some time, and I'll need to build some specialized equipment. Are you willing to trust me with this? I've never done anything like it before, and I can't guarantee success." The dragon studied the young mechanic for a long moment. Elena held her breath, waiting. Finally, her mother spoke. "You are the first human to examine me who has shown no fear, only curiosity and determination. You look at me not as a magical beast, but as a system to be understood. It is strange, but not unwelcome." "Very well, mechanic. You may try." Jake nodded seriously. "Thank you. I'll need tonight to prepare. Can you stay here comfortably?" "I have slept in worse places," the dragon replied. "I'll stay with her," Elena added quickly. Jake shouldered his bag and stood. "I'll be back at first light with everything we need. Get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." As the mechanic walked back toward the city, Elena settled down against her mother's side, feeling the warmth of the dragon's scales against her back. The rattling breathing continued, but now there was hope. For the first time in days, Elena felt like they might actually solve this. "Little one," the dragon said softly, "this human is unusual." "He is," Elena agreed, "but maybe unusual is exactly what we need." The night passed slowly. Elena dozed fitfully, waking whenever her mother's breathing seemed to worsen. Other times she simply sat and watched the stars, thinking about Jake's examination and his explanation. The idea that dragon fire was a biological process rather than pure magic was revolutionary to her. She'd grown up with stories of dragons as mystical beings, creatures of legend and ancient power. Jake saw them as complex biological machines, which somehow made them even more impressive. True to his word, Jake appeared at dawn. He wasn't alone. He'd brought a small cart pulled by a mechanical horse, one of those clockwork creations the trader had mentioned. The cart was loaded with equipment, metal tanks, flexible tubes, tools both familiar and strange, and several boxes whose contents Elena could only guess at. "Good morning," Jake called out as he approached. "How's the patient?" "The same," Elena replied. "Maybe slightly worse." Jake nodded, unsurprised. "The blockage is progressive. The longer it's there, the more minerals can deposit. We need to work fast." He began unloading the cart, laying out equipment in an organized fashion. As he worked, he explained his plan. "I've created a specialized cleaning solution overnight," he said, holding up one of the tanks. "It's based on the same chemicals we use to remove mineral buildup from industrial boilers, but I've modified the formula to be less caustic. It should break down the crystalline deposits without harming organic tissue." He set up a pump system connected to long, flexible tubes with specially designed nozzles on the ends. "I'll need to insert these into the blocked passages and pump the solution through. It'll take time for the chemicals to work, and we'll need to do several rounds of treatment to get everything clear." The dragon watched with interest as Jake prepared. "This solution will not harm me?" "I've tested it on samples of scales and tissue I collected last night," Jake assured her. "It's safe for living tissue, but very effective on mineral deposits. The key is controlling the concentration and the exposure time." Over the next several hours, Jake worked with careful precision. He had the dragon open her mouth and use specialized mirrors and lamps to guide the tubes into the correct passages. Elena helped hold equipment and pass tools as needed, following Jake's instructions carefully. The mechanic worked with steady hands and complete focus, occasionally pausing to check measurements or adjust the flow rate of his pump. "This is fascinating," Jake murmured as he worked. "Your fire-breathing system is incredibly sophisticated. You have 3 chambers that mix different chemicals before ignition. The whole thing is temperature regulated through a series of heat exchange passages. It's like the most advanced chemical plant I've ever seen, except it's biological." The dragon, unable to speak with the tubes in her throat, made a rumbling sound that might have been agreement or amusement. The first round of treatment took 2 hours. Jake carefully withdrew the tubes and let the dragon rest while the solution did its work. During the waiting period, he examined his equipment, making small adjustments and preparing for the next stage. "How did you learn all this?" Elena asked him. "About dragons and how their bodies work." I didn't, Jake admitted. I knew the basic theory, everyone learns that in school these days, but I've never seen a dragon up close before, let alone examine one. Most of what I'm doing is extrapolating from other systems I know. Industrial equipment, mechanical processes, chemical reactions. Living things follow patterns too, once you know how to look for them. The healers couldn't help because they were trying to use magic, Elena realized. But magic wasn't the problem. Exactly, Jake said. Sometimes the solution to a problem isn't more power or different spells. Sometimes it's just understanding the basic mechanics of what's going wrong and fixing it systematically. After the waiting period, Jake performed another examination, using his diagnostic equipment to check the dragon's breathing passages. His face brightened. "It's working," he announced. "The deposits are breaking down. I can see clear improvement already, but we need to do at least 2 more rounds to get everything cleared properly." They repeated the process twice more throughout the day. Each time, Jake carefully cleaned and sterilized his equipment before inserting the tubes again. Each time, Elena saw the dragon's breathing become a little easier, the rattling in her chest diminishing gradually. By late afternoon, after the final treatment, the change was obvious. The dragon's breathing had smoothed out, no longer accompanied by that terrible rattling sound. Her heartbeat, when Jake checked it with his stethoscope, was strong and steady. Even her scales seemed to be regaining some of their former luster. "Try producing fire," Jake instructed, stepping back to a safe distance. "Start small and gentle." The dragon closed her eyes in concentration. A moment later, a steady stream of flame poured from her mouth, bright and controlled. It was the most beautiful fire Elena had seen her mother produce in weeks. The dragon maintained it for several seconds, then cut it off cleanly with no sparks or smoke. "Perfect," the dragon breathed, her voice noticeably clearer and stronger. "Absolutely perfect. Young mechanic, you have done what I believed impossible. You have healed me without magic, using only your knowledge and your tools." Jake grinned, clearly pleased. "You're not completely healed yet. It'll take a few days for your system to fully recover. Now that the blockages are clear, your body needs to repair the damage caused by the reduced oxygen and the pressure buildup. But the worst is definitely over." Elena threw her arms around the dragon's neck, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Mother, you're going to be all right." "Thanks to this remarkable human," the dragon agreed, looking at Jake with newfound respect. "I owe you a debt, mechanic. Dragons do not forget such things." Jake packed up his equipment, looking slightly embarrassed by the praise. "Just doing my job. Well, technically not my job since I usually work on machines, but you know what I mean." "Will you need to see her again?" Elena asked, "to check on her recovery?" "I'd like to," Jake said. "In 3 days if possible. I want to make sure everything is healing properly and that there's no residual buildup. Also, I need to discuss prevention with you both." The dragon tilted her head curiously. "Prevention? This problem will come back if we don't address the underlying cause," Jake explained. "You're going to continue breathing fire, which means you're going to continue exposing those passages to high heat and minerals. We need to find a way to prevent the buildup from happening again." "What do you suggest?" the dragon asked. "I need to think about it," Jake admitted. "But there are possibilities. Maybe a regular flushing routine with a milder solution. Maybe dietary changes to reduce mineral intake. Maybe even modifications to your fire-breathing technique to reduce the temperature in those specific passages. I need to do some research and run some calculations." They agreed to meet again in 3 days at the same location. Jake loaded his equipment back onto his cart and headed back to Ironhaven, leaving Elena and her mother alone in the field as the sun began to set once again. That night, the dragon's breathing was peaceful and steady. Elena slept properly for the first time in over a week, lulled by the sound of her mother's healthy heartbeat and gentle breath. When she woke in the morning, she found the dragon already awake, stretching her wings experimentally. "How do you feel?" Elena asked. "Strong," the dragon replied simply. Better than I have felt in months, perhaps even years. I did not realize how gradual the buildup had been. The difference now is extraordinary. She folded her wings and looked down at Elena with wise, ancient eyes. That young mechanic has a gift, little one. He sees the world in a unique way. Over the next 3 days, the dragon's recovery continued remarkably. Her scales regained their full shine, becoming brilliant emerald again. Her fire control was precise and powerful, exactly as it had been in her prime. She took short flights around the field, testing her strength, and each time she returned looking more confident and capable. When Jake arrived on the 3rd day, he brought more equipment and several notebooks filled with calculations and diagrams. "I've been doing research," he announced, setting down his bags. "I think I've worked out a prevention plan." He spent the next hour examining the dragon thoroughly, checking every aspect of her recovery. Satisfied with what he found, he laid out his prevention strategy. "First, diet," he said. "You need to drink water that's been treated to remove excess minerals. I can build you a filtration system that's portable. It uses sand and charcoal to filter out the minerals before you drink. Second, maintenance. Once a month, you'll need to do a gentle flush of those passages with a mild cleaning solution. I've prepared instructions for Elena on how to mix it and administer it. It's simple enough that you won't need me to be present, though I'm happy to help the first few times." He pulled out detailed diagrams and notes, showing them both the step-by-step process. Elena studied them carefully, committing the procedures to memory. The dragon watched with interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Third, and this is the interesting part," Jake continued, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about your fire-breathing mechanics. The temperature in your combustion chambers is necessary for producing fire, but the passages leading to them don't need to be quite as hot. I think we can modify your technique slightly to reduce the heat exposure in the vulnerable areas." "Modify my fire breathing?" the dragon asked, sounding skeptical. "I have breathed fire for over 3 centuries, mechanic. It is as natural to me as walking." "I understand," Jake said respectfully, "but hear me out. When you breathe fire, you're creating an intense chemical reaction. The heat is a byproduct, and some of that heat is being wasted in the passages instead of being directed outward with the flame. If you adjust the timing of when you mix the chemicals, you can achieve the same fire output with less internal heat." He used diagrams to illustrate his point, showing the dragon's fire-breathing system and highlighting where the heat was building up unnecessarily. The dragon studied the drawings with growing interest. "You are suggesting I ignite the mixture further forward, closer to the point of release," she said slowly. "Exactly," Jake confirmed. "It'll take practice to adjust your technique, but it should reduce the heat stress on those passages by about 30%, according to my calculations. That, combined with the filtered water and monthly maintenance, should prevent the buildup from recurring." The dragon was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then she nodded. "Very well, I am willing to try. Show me what you mean." Jake spent the rest of the afternoon working with the dragon on her fire-breathing technique. It was an unusual sight, a human mechanic coaching an ancient dragon on how to breathe fire more efficiently. Elena watched in fascination as her mother practiced, gradually adjusting the timing and intensity of her flames according to Jake's instructions. "That's it," Jake called out after one particularly well-controlled burst. "Did you feel the difference? Less heat in the back, more force in the output." "I did," the dragon admitted, sounding surprised. "It is more efficient. The fire is actually stronger for less effort." They practiced for another hour until the dragon had fully adapted to the new technique. By the time they finished, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "I think we're done here," Jake said, packing up his equipment. "You're healthy, you know how to prevent the problem from recurring, and Elena has all the instructions she needs to help with maintenance. Unless you have any other concerns?" "I have one concern," the dragon said seriously. "The matter of payment. You have saved my life, mechanic. That is not a debt easily satisfied. Jake looked uncomfortable. I don't need payment. This was fascinating from an educational standpoint. I learned more about dragon biology in 3 days than I could have learned in years of reading books. Nevertheless, you will be compensated, the dragon insisted. I am no thief to take services without proper payment. What is it that you desire? Gold? I have accumulated a considerable hoard over the centuries. Ancient knowledge? I can teach you secrets lost to most of the world. Power? I could grant you a measure of my own strength. Jake shook his head. I don't want any of those things. Honestly, if you want to pay me, there is one thing that would be valuable. Name it, the dragon said. Knowledge, Jake replied. Not magical secrets or lost lore. I want to understand how you work, how dragons function. I want to document your biology, your capabilities, the mechanics of everything you can do. With your permission, of course. That information could help other dragons if they ever face similar problems. It could help humanity understand your species better. And selfishly, it would be the most incredible engineering reference material imaginable. The dragon considered this, then began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that made the ground vibrate. You are a strange human, Jake the mechanic. Most of your kind would choose gold or power without hesitation. But you want to turn me into a reference manual. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit ridiculous, Jake admitted, grinning. But yes, essentially. I accept, the dragon declared. You may study me and document what you learn. It is a fair trade, my knowledge for your skill. I will visit you periodically in your city, and you may conduct your examinations and ask your questions. Perhaps other dragons could benefit from your unique perspective. We are a proud species, often too proud to seek help until it is nearly too late, as I nearly did. They made arrangements for regular visits. The dragon would come to Ironhaven once every 2 weeks, landing in this same field. Jake would conduct examinations, collect data, and continue learning about dragon biology and capabilities. In return, he would provide any maintenance or medical assistance the dragon might need. As Jake prepared to leave, Elena stopped him. Thank you, she said quietly. I was terrified I was going to lose her. You saved the only family I have. Jake's expression softened. I'm glad I could help. And Elena, if you ever want to learn more about how all this works, you're welcome to visit my workshop. I could use an assistant who understands both dragons and human medicine, someone who can bridge that gap between the magical world and the mechanical one. Elena's eyes widened with interest. Really? You'd teach me? If you're interested in learning, absolutely, Jake said. The world needs more people who can think across traditional boundaries. You already have unique experience that most people never get. We could build on that. Elena looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Go, little one, learn his ways. I will be well, and you should have your own path to walk. You can visit me regularly, just as the mechanic will. Over the following weeks, Elena became a regular presence in Jake's workshop. She moved into a small apartment in Ironhaven, but visited her mother frequently, using the dragon's flying ability to travel quickly between the city and their mountain home. Jake taught her about mechanics and engineering, while she taught him about the natural world and the old ways of healing. Together, they formed an unusual partnership that combined ancient wisdom with modern innovation. Word of Jake's successful treatment of the dragon spread through Ironhaven and then beyond. Other mechanics began consulting with him on unusual problems, seeking his perspective on challenges that didn't fit traditional categories. Jake's reputation grew not just as a skilled mechanic, but as someone who could see connections others missed. Someone who could apply engineering principles to any system, whether mechanical or biological. 3 months after the initial treatment, something remarkable happened. Another dragon appeared at the field outside Ironhaven's western gate. This one was older and larger than Elena's mother. with scales of deep crimson touched with gold. Jake received an urgent message and rushed to the field with his equipment, Elena hurrying alongside him. The Crimson Dragon was accompanied by a young male dragon, barely more than a juvenile, who was struggling to fly properly. One of his wings hung at an odd angle, and he landed clumsily, clearly in pain. "I am Vermilion," the Crimson Dragon announced in a voice like rolling thunder. "I have heard of the human mechanic who heals dragons with strange tools and stranger methods. My grandson has injured his wing. Our traditional healers say he will never fly properly again, that the bone has set wrong and cannot be fixed. But Emerald, whom you treated, suggested I seek your opinion." Jake approached carefully, examining the young dragon's wing. Elena's mother had indeed come to visit, and she watched with interest as Jake conducted his examination. He took measurements, tested the range of motion, and used various diagnostic tools to understand the problem. "The bone has healed," Jake said finally, "but it healed in the wrong position. There's a rotation in the wing joint that's throwing off the aerodynamics. Traditional healing accelerated the recovery, but it locked the bone in place before it was properly aligned." "Can anything be done?" Vermilion asked, her voice tight with worry. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Maybe. It would require surgery, which is risky and complicated. I'd need to re-break the bone, set it correctly, and immobilize it while it heals again. But this time, we'd use mechanical bracing to ensure it stays in the right position. It's possible, but I want to be clear about the risks." "What are my alternatives?" the young dragon asked, his voice small and scared. "You can fly as you are," Jake said honestly, "but never as well as you should be able to. You'll always have pain, always have to compensate for the rotation. Or we can try to fix it properly, with all the risks that entails." The young dragon looked at his grandmother, then at Elena's mother. Both older dragons nodded encouragingly. He turned back to Jake with determination in his eyes. "Fix it properly," he said. "I would rather risk the attempt than accept being forever diminished." Jake nodded seriously. "All right, but this is beyond what I can do in a field with improvised equipment. We need to do this in a proper facility with sterile conditions and proper tools. I'll need time to prepare." Over the next 2 weeks, Jake transformed a large storage building on the outskirts of Ironhaven into a makeshift surgical facility. He brought in every piece of equipment he could acquire or build, studying surgical techniques from medical texts and adapting them for dragon anatomy. Elena assisted with everything, her knowledge of dragon physiology proving invaluable in the planning stages. The surgery took place on a cool autumn morning. The young dragon was sedated using a carefully calculated mixture of compounds that Jake and Elena had developed through research and testing. Jake worked with 3 assistants, including Elena, all of them following his precise instructions. The procedure took 6 hours. Jake carefully rebroke the wing bone, aligned it properly, and set it using a combination of traditional surgical techniques and innovative mechanical bracing. He used metal pins and adjustable supports that would allow the wing to be positioned exactly right as it healed. Throughout the operation, he worked with steady hands and absolute focus, treating the dragon's wing with the same precision he'd applied to a delicate machine. When the young dragon woke up several hours later, his wing was encased in a complex framework of metal and padding. Jake explained the recovery process: 6 weeks of complete rest, then gradual physical therapy to rebuild strength. The mechanical brace would be adjusted weekly to ensure the bone was setting properly. The recovery was long and sometimes frustrating for the young dragon, who chafed at the restrictions on his movement. But Jake and Elena worked with him patiently, monitoring his healing and adjusting the brace as needed. Elena's mother visited frequently, offering encouragement and companionship to the young dragon during his recovery. 6 weeks later, Jake carefully removed the brace. The young dragon stretched his wing experimentally, then began to move it through a full range of motion. His eyes widened with joy as he realized there was no pain, No awkward resistance. "It feels perfect," he breathed. "It feels like it should." "Let's test it," Jake said, stepping back. The young dragon spread both wings, checked his balance, and launched himself into the air. His flight was initially shaky, the muscles needing to rebuild their strength and coordination. But his form was correct, his wings moving in perfect symmetry. He climbed higher, testing himself, then began to perform aerial maneuvers with increasing confidence. "He flies true," Vermilion called out, her voice filled with emotion. "You have given him back his future, mechanic. You have my eternal gratitude." Word of the wing surgery spread even faster than news of the first treatment. Dragons began to seek out Jake for various ailments and injuries, problems that traditional magical healing couldn't address. Some came with respiratory issues, like Elena's mother had faced. Others had joint problems, scale disorder, or injuries that had healed improperly. Each case taught Jake something new, expanding his understanding of dragon biology and physiology. Within 6 months, Jake's workshop had expanded into a full clinic that specialized in dragon medical care. He hired additional staff, training them in his methods and teaching them to look at problems from an engineering perspective. Elena became his lead assistant, her unique background making her invaluable in understanding and communicating with their dragon patients. The dragons who came for treatment often stayed to share knowledge. They taught Jake about their biology from their own perspective, explaining sensations and processes that no external examination could reveal. This collaboration between dragons and humans, between ancient wisdom and modern science, created breakthroughs that benefited both species. One day, a delegation arrived from the Dragon Council, the governing body that spoke for dragonkind across the continent. They were led by an ancient dragon named Silvercrest, whose scales shimmered like moonlight and whose age was said to exceed 5 centuries. "Jake the Mechanic," Silvercrest said formally, "the Dragon Council acknowledges your contributions to our kind. You have healed injuries we thought permanent, cured ailments we believed incurable. You have done this not with magic, but with knowledge and skill. We have come to offer you a position." Jake stood respectfully before the assembled dragons. "What kind of position?" "We wish to establish a formal relationship between dragonkind and humanity," Silvercrest explained. "For too long, we have existed in separate worlds, viewing each other with suspicion or indifference. You have shown us that collaboration is not only possible, but beneficial. We would like you to become the first director of the Institute for Cross-Species Medical Research, a new organization we are founding jointly with the human governments." Jake was stunned. "That's a tremendous honor, but I'm just a mechanic." "You are far more than that," Silvercrest said. "You are someone who sees past traditional boundaries, who applies reason and creativity to solve problems others consider unsolvable. You are someone both humans and dragons can trust. That is precisely what this position requires." After discussing it with Elena and her mother, Jake accepted the position. The institute was established in Ironhaven, in a large facility built to accommodate both human and dragon researchers. It became a place where the mechanical and magical worlds intersected, where engineers and healers worked side by side to understand the principles that governed all living things. Elena became one of the Institute's first research directors, specializing in bridging traditional healing practices with modern medical techniques. She developed new treatments that combined the best of both approaches, often achieving results that neither method could produce alone. The Institute attracted talented individuals from across the continent: mechanics, doctors, healers, alchemists, and scholars of all kinds came to study and collaborate. Dragons volunteered as research subjects, sharing their knowledge and allowing examinations that revealed secrets of their biology that had been unknown for millennia. In return, they received medical care that extended their lives and improved their quality of life in ways magic alone never could. 5 years after Jake first treated Elena's mother, The Institute had fundamentally changed how humans and dragons related to each other. Trade agreements followed medical collaborations. Cultural exchanges brought understanding where there had been ignorance. Young humans and dragons grew up learning about each other, seeing past the differences to recognize the common ground. Jake never stopped being a mechanic at heart. Even as the Institute grew and his administrative responsibilities increased, he still spent time in the workshop, still approached every problem with the same analytical mindset that had first led him to treat a sick dragon as a system that needed fixing. He published papers on dragon biology that revolutionized the field, but his clearest pride was always in the practical applications, the treatments that worked, the lives that were saved, the problems that were solved. Elena's mother, Emerald, lived for many more years, her health maintained by the regular cleanings and preventive care Jake had established. She became an unofficial ambassador between the dragon and human communities, her intelligence and patience helping to smooth over misunderstandings and build bridges between the species. She often said that getting sick had been the best thing that ever happened to her because it led to connections she never would have made otherwise. The young dragon whose wing Jake had repaired, whose name was Copper, eventually became a flight instructor at the Institute. He taught both young dragons and human engineers about the principles of aerodynamics and flight, his own recovered ability standing as proof that even seemingly permanent problems could be solved with the right approach. Other species began to take notice of what was happening in Ironhaven. Griffins, phoenixes, and other magical creatures started seeking treatment at the Institute. Each new species brought new challenges and new opportunities to learn. Jake's core principle remained the same. Every living thing was a system that followed rules, and those rules could be understood and worked with if you approached them correctly. One evening, many years after that first desperate visit to his workshop, Jake stood on a balcony of the Institute building, watching the sunset. Elena joined him, now a renowned researcher in her own right, her groundbreaking work in cross-species medicine having earned her recognition across the continent. "Did you ever imagine it would become all this?" Elena asked, gesturing to the sprawling Institute campus below, where dragons and humans moved freely among the buildings, working together on projects that would have seemed impossible just years before. "Honestly, no," Jake admitted with a laugh. "When you came to my workshop that day, I thought I'd be taking a look at an interesting problem and then getting back to fixing steam engines. I never imagined a sick dragon would completely change my life." "Mother says she owes you everything," Elena said softly. "She tells everyone that you saw her not as a magical beast or a mythical creature, but as a person with a problem you might be able to solve. That simple shift in perspective made all the difference." "That's the thing about being a mechanic," Jake said thoughtfully. "You learn to see systems instead of mysteries. Magic makes people think things are incomprehensible, beyond understanding. But everything follows patterns. Everything has mechanisms. Once you start looking for those patterns, you realize that nothing is truly beyond understanding. It just takes observation, logic, and willingness to try." Below them, a young dragon and a human child played together in one of the Institute's courtyards, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a sight that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago, but was now perfectly normal in Ironhaven. "We changed the world," Elena said wonderingly, "just by being willing to think differently." "You changed it by being desperate enough to try something unusual," Jake corrected, "and brave enough to bring your mother to a mechanic when everyone else said it was hopeless. That took real courage." "Or desperation," Elena said with a smile. "I'm still not sure which." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Jake replied. "Desperation can push you past the boundaries you normally accept. It can make you try things that seem impossible. And sometimes those impossible things turn out to be perfectly possible. You just needed the right approach." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the activity below. The Institute was hosting a conference the next day, bringing together researchers from across the continent to share discoveries and collaborate on new projects. There would be dragons presenting research on human medicine, humans presenting research on dragon biology, and collaborative projects that bridged both worlds. "I've been thinking about the future," Elena said eventually, "about where we go from here. We've accomplished so much, but there's still so much more to learn." "There always will be," Jake agreed. "That's what makes it exciting. Every answer leads to new questions. Every problem we solve reveals new challenges. That's not a flaw in our approach. That's the nature of understanding. Knowledge isn't a destination you reach. It's a journey that never really ends." "My mother wants to write a history of all this," Elena mentioned, "from her perspective as a dragon who lived through the transition. She says future generations need to understand how it happened, how humans and dragons went from strangers to partners." "That's a good idea," Jake said. "History matters. People need to know that change is possible, that rigid thinking isn't inevitable. If we can show how it happened here, maybe similar changes can happen elsewhere. Maybe other species can learn to work together instead of staying isolated." Below, the mechanical street lamps of Ironhaven began to light up as darkness fell, their steady glow joining with magical lights that some dragons had contributed to the city's infrastructure. The blend of technology and magic, human ingenuity and dragon wisdom, was becoming the new normal in this place that had once been purely human territory. "Jake," Elena said quietly, "thank you for everything, for taking a chance on an impossible request, for seeing my mother as a patient instead of a monster, for teaching me to think differently, for all of it." Jake smiled and put a friendly hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for asking, for being brave enough to seek help in an unusual place, for being willing to bridge two worlds. You're the one who made this possible, Elena. I just fixed what was broken. You're the one building what comes next." They remained on the balcony as night fell completely, watching the lights of Ironhaven spread out below them. Somewhere in the city, a dragon was being treated for an ailment that would have been fatal just years ago. Somewhere else, a human engineer was learning techniques from a dragon master that would inspire new inventions. The old barriers were breaking down, replaced by collaboration and mutual respect. The Institute stood as proof that the impossible could become possible, that asking "what if" could lead to revolutionary change, and that sometimes the solution to a magical problem was simply practical thinking applied with skill and care. It had started with one desperate young woman bringing her sick dragon mother to a mechanic, and from that single act of unconventional thinking had grown a movement that changed the world. In the years that followed, the model established in Ironhaven spread to other cities and other regions. Institutes modeled on Jake's original opened across the continent, each one becoming a center where different species could meet, learn from each other, and work together toward common goals. The age of isolation was ending, replaced by an age of collaboration. Jake continued his work, training new generations of practitioners who could think across traditional boundaries. Elena led groundbreaking research that expanded the possibilities of what could be achieved through cross-species cooperation. And Emerald, the dragon who had nearly died from a problem no one understood, lived to see her kind and humanity become not just allies, but friends. The story of the sick dragon and the mechanic became legend, told to children of both species as an example of what could happen when people were willing to see past their assumptions and try something new. It was a reminder that problems weren't always solved with more power or ancient magic, but sometimes with careful observation, logical thinking, and a willingness to try unconventional solutions. And in Ironhaven, in the institute that stood as a monument to that lesson, the work continued. Because there were always more problems to solve, more mysteries to unravel, and more bridges to build between the worlds that had once stood apart. The journey of understanding was endless, but that was exactly what made it worth pursuing. Every day brought new discoveries, new collaborations, and new proof that the impossible was simply the possible, waiting for someone to figure out how. Jake never stopped being a mechanic. He just expanded his definition of what could be fixed, and in doing so, helped fix something much larger than any individual patient. He helped fix the broken understanding between two species, proving that with the right approach and enough determination, even the most fundamental barriers could be overcome. And it had all started because one young woman refused to accept that nothing could be done, and one mechanic was willing to approach an impossible problem with nothing more than curiosity, logic, and carefully applied skill. The sun had long since set on that day, but its light had illuminated a path forward that neither humans nor dragons would have found alone. Together they were building something new, something better than what either species had achieved in isolation. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Jake had always known. Everything is a system. Every system can be understood, and understanding is the first step toward making things better. In the quiet of the evening, as dragons and humans alike settled in for the night in the city that had become home to both, the Institute's lights continued to burn. There was always more work to do, always more to learn, always another challenge waiting to be solved. And that, ultimately, was what made it all worthwhile. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the answers, but the questions. Not the end result, but the process of getting there, one careful step at a time, with logic as the guide and determination as the fuel. The dragon who had been sick was well. The mechanic who had been ordinary had become extraordinary. And the world that had been divided had found a way to come together. It wasn't magic that had accomplished this miracle. It was something far more powerful and far more human. The simple, stubborn refusal to accept that things couldn't be better, combined with the skill and knowledge to actually make them so. And in the end, that was the real magic. Not spells or ancient power, but the magic of human ingenuity applied with care, of compassion combined with capability, of seeing problems as puzzles to be solved rather than mysteries to be feared. That was the magic that changed everything. And it started with just two words: I'll try.